round in the house. I say you're round in the house in your mind.
Today's video is the final installment of the history of Bad Boy Entertainment. The saga of the label, its larger-than-life founder, as well as the many talented artists that came from this label. And if this is your first time here or you haven't checked out the previous videos in the series, I highly recommend going back and checking out parts 1 and 2 before you pick up on part 3, just so that you get the full story arc, and I'll leave the links to parts 1 and 2 in the description below. So in part 1, we went back to the early days, how Sean Combs, aka Diddy, went from intern to industry power player, built Bad Boy Entertainment, and helped shape the 90s sound with artists like the Notorious B.I.G., Faith Evans, and 112. We also talked about the East Coast West Coast tensions and how Bad Boy's rise was tied to that whole era. And in part 2, we picked up with the aftermath of Biggie's death, the shiny suit era, the push to keep the label on top, and the cracks that started to show. So at this point, we're at the golden era of the Bad Boy label. But before we close that era out, I want to take a minute to talk about record deals. Before starting research for this video, I knew as much about record labels and recording contracts as I do about astrophysics, which is nothing. I know nothing about that subject. But learning this stuff was key for understanding how Bad Boy worked, and really the whole music industry. But specific to Bad Boy, it paints a more clearer image of how things ended up the way they did and what happened to the artists. A recording contract is basically an agreement between the record label and the artist. It lays out what the artist delivers and how the label will distribute that music, promote it, as well as profit from it. In the pre-streaming era, sales, radio, and MTV were everything. And deals often came with advances, which were essentially a loan that the label would recoup from your future earnings. And that recoupment not only covers the loan that they give the artist, but also recording costs, marketing, music videos, tours, even living expenses for some artists. So from the start, most artists are in debt. It kind of makes me think about how sometimes I'll be on Instagram or TikTok and then you see this up and coming young rapper with a stack of money, you know, he's doing the money phone and all of that. And I'm just thinking that's probably the money from the loan. But anyway, let's say that you get a $500,000 advance. You do not see another cent until you make that money back for the label, plus all the other money and costs that they covered. And then there's also royalties. Royalties are the percentage an artist gets after recoupment. Oftentimes, this percentage is somewhere between 5% and 20% from what I've seen in my sources. And this percentage varies based on the amount of leverage that the artist has, as well as whether or not they took an advance, because not all artists take an advance. I'm not sure how common it is, but it's not always the case. And then what I mean by leverage is it depends on how successful they are coming right out the gate. Let's say, for example, you are Megan Thee Stallion. Right now, she's hot. And so if, I don't know, for some reason she were to get a record deal and during negotiations, she could probably negotiate for a higher percentage because she's hot right now. People love her music. And then there's also masters, which are the original recordings. And owning your masters means that you control licensing for films, commercials, samples, and you keep profiting long after you stop performing. So they play your song in a film, they sample your music, you get a cut of that indefinitely. But in most deals, it's the label that owns the masters. And it reminds me of years back when Prince was able to acquire his masters. And I remember him talking about it in interviews and how big of a deal it was. And I didn't really understand it back then, but now that I understand what masters are and how they work, I'm like, yeah, no wonder he was really flexing about him having his masters at this point, because he fought for it. It's a big deal. That's a lot of money, especially if your music retains relevance throughout the years. I don't ever have to work again money. And then the contract also includes what's called deliverables, which is the number of albums that you owe the label within whatever set term. 5 albums seems to be the more common amount, but labels often start with 1 and then they extend it to whatever number based on how well the first one sells. So it can be up to them to determine if they want to proceed with more albums with you, or they just want to stop right there because you weren't making them enough money. And then some contracts also have what's called an exclusivity clause. And this clause keeps artists from being able to record elsewhere. It can also even limit whether or not they're able to do other types of work, like acting, for example, or modeling, or going into some type of endorsement deal. And then there's what's called a 360 deal. And I've heard 360 dropped here, there, everywhere. And 360 deals lets the label take a cut from everything that you do. When I say everything, I mean everything. Merch, touring, you in a commercial. Then there's what's called joint ventures, which is splitting the cost and profits more evenly between the artist and the label. This shit gets really deep. What I just gave you is that's just a high level of how recording contracts work. It gets really deep, y'all. But I thought it was important to go over some level of how they work, because every clause and percentage is about leverage, and the label always has the most leverage in the relationship. And when you understand that, the Bad Boy story really makes even more sense, because these contracts, these labels are already very predatory towards their artists. They're built in favor of the label. So Bad Boy took that advantage and just took it to a whole new level. The contracts were very restrictive. The publishing grabs were bigger than what was normal. And the pressure tactics were very aggressive based on what the artists have shared from their experiences. And this is where the idea of the Bad Boy curse comes in. The Bad Boy curse is one of those things people talk about like it's hip-hop folklore. And this phrase, it floated around in hip-hop circles to describe the pattern of artists who came into the label with momentum only to end up with stalled careers, money problems, or locked in contracts they could not get out of. Some of them locked up under the jail.
I'm somebody's bitch.
Some saw albums perpetually delayed or shelved, others lost their publishing, and some vanished from the spotlight altogether. And you could argue that this is just the music business, this is just how things work. It's corrupt anyway, right? And sure, fine. There's plenty of other artists that have nothing to do with Bad Boy who have shared similar stories. And that doesn't make it okay. It's up across the board. But at Bad Boy, it happened so continuously and to so many high profile names that it took on a life of its own. A lot of the info I took for this video comes from ex-Bad Boy artist Mark Curry, and it's from his book Dancing with the Devil. Really interesting book, highly recommend. I will leave a link to it in Amazon in the description below. In his book, he details his own experience and what he saw happen to others while at Bad Boy, and at the center was a business model that worked almost too well for Diddy. Essentially, own half of everyone's publishing, stall their careers until they had no leverage, and then push artists into signing away rights with, quote, recommended lawyers who worked in Diddy's favor. This seems to be a common theme. Diddy was always giving them access to the best lawyers, his lawyers, the label's lawyers, which their whole purpose is to protect the label and its founder. And on the surface, it looks like he's doing these artists a favor. You want to look over the contract? No problem. Take your time. Actually, here's a lawyer that can help you look over it so you feel more comfortable. And if there's anything that doesn't look right based on what the lawyer is saying, you could come, we could talk about it and go over things. But in reality, it's like letting your landlord's cousin negotiate your lease. That is some grimy shit. And as I was taking in this information, I was thinking about the fact that most of these artists were very young. They're coming from an underprivileged, underserved background. So they don't have an education or knowledge in business practices or anything like that, legal stuff, like nothing. It's purely predatory. And as I mentioned earlier, publishing is where the money is. And Diddy knew that. The public image that was put out there was family, loyalty, and love. But behind closed doors, it was about greed, coercion, and control. Artists claimed to have been financially starved, bound to long-term contracts, and sometimes pitted against one another. Mark Curry states that when he signed a $75,000 deal, in the end, he only saw $25,000 $100,000. And this was after Diddy bought out the contract to lock in the publishing. And then there was also The Lox. The Lox was made up of Jadakiss, Styles P, and Sheek Louch. And The Lox had a 6-album deal that turned into a trap. See, this is crazy. I did not know this. Diddy took their best demos, including tracks like All About the Benjamins, which, as much as I can't stand a lot of Diddy's music, like what he published under his name, because of course he's also an artist on the label, I loved All About the Benjamins. I still love it. I bop it. It's a bop. But he took that from The Lox apparently, and then he added his name as a writer. That's crazy. But what's funny is they're featured on it. So he took it and then he had them feature on it. How crazy is that? Then he had their first album sitting in limbo, and it wasn't until The Lox took it publicly that anything changed.
Let the Lox go! Let the Lox go!
In August of last year, Jason Jadakiss Phillips, David Styles, and Sean Sheik Jacobs, better known as The Lox, were released from their record deal with Bad Boy Entertainment and joined such artists as Drag On, E, and DMX, now officially making them Rough Riders.
They went on this whole Free the Lox campaign. They had it on shirts, and then they went on the radio and called him out publicly.
Check this out, man. The last time y'all did this, man, y'all did the whole campaign, let the Lox go and all that. Y'all ain't want to be down with Bad Boy, so we let y'all go. Y'all want to be down with us, we let y'all go, we keep it moving. But to get on there and portray like somebody got to go and steal and rob and be shysting y'all, that ain't really correct, you know what I'm saying? First of all, I'm at my office right now. I'm always accessible. Y'all ain't got to get on the radio and do certain tactics and do certain things to ever holler at me. Jadakiss, last time I saw you, I told you, let's get together, let's talk. You know what I'm saying? I told you I'm accessible. I said if anything don't come, if there's somebody standing in the way for you expressing yourself, if any of y'all expressing yourself, y'all can come get at me directly. You know what I'm saying? All that throwing the refrigerator and you gonna kill, y'all ain't killing nobody, man. You know what I'm saying? We businessmen. We all mature adults here. All that right there, I'm at my office. Y'all can sit on this interview with her and talk as long as y'all want to talk about it. Or you can take the invitation I gave you before. But it's not even getting there because of your get on the radio, whatever tactics. I ain't your enemy.
Dog,
you need to bang like that on cats that's coming at you. I ain't your enemy.
Just yesterday we got a note from your office saying you don't have no idea of none of this or none of nothing.
Just yesterday, your lawyer told us that.
I see you at the show backstage. You said find out what it was.
But don't sit here and portray like Puff took nothing from y'all.
What is it? What is it? What do you call it?
If it's 10 years,
what do you call it? And don't say we can come to your office or do none of that, because we can't do none of that.
Street was Volume 14.
We can't handle it no other way but with lawyers, and you know that, so don't get on the radio and act like a tough guy or none of that.
You know how we can settle?
You acting tough.
I'm at my office, so why don't we stop talking on the radio?
No, you want people to stop talking because you just don't want to know the truth, dog. We made one record with you. Money, Power, Respect. It's 10 years later, and you still got half of our publishing. Now, there's no way you can make it justifiable that you said you deserve half of our publishing.
You to my face. We just at the concert. You ain't saying nothing.
What are we going to do saying it to your face? Get sued? What do you want us to do? We can't touch. We can't be violent or none of that. We can't even have.
You're saying all this, dog. 2 years ago, levels in Miami.
Let's recognize real. Y'all know where the office is at. There's a big sign on it.
And you know what? It worked, because a big part about the label, well, Diddy, was making sure that the public optics were different than what was actually occurring behind the scenes. Based on, allegedly, this is all based on what Bad Boy artists have shared about their experiences. I just want to also mention that while I'm talking all this. He let them out, but he kept their publishing. Then there was Black Rob. Black Rob was an artist signed in 1996, and his song Whoa was a certified hit. But his album was delayed for years with endless excuses. When his album Life Story finally dropped, it went platinum, but Rob stayed broke. He said that his deal with the label was so bad, he could not even afford to pay child support despite having a hit record. And then of course there was Mace. We had a whole big Mace section in part 2. Mase literally carried the Bad Boy label during the Shiny Suit era. His album Harlem World went quadruple platinum, and his momentum helped Diddy secure a huge distribution deal with BMG. But he was also strategically placed as Biggie's replacement because remember, Mase came out not long after the death of Biggie, and he would even dub Mase over posthumous Biggie tracks to keep revenue flowing. And I never thought about that until I started doing research for this video, because there was so much released after Biggie's death of Biggie. It was crazy. It was ridiculous. He was just milking. He was getting a drop out of that artist that he could get even in death. And then there was also the artist G-Dep. He signed in 1998 for $350,000, and this was for a 5-album deal. And G-Dep was actually brought in by Black Rob. He was part of Black Rob's crew, but Diddy snatched him up and then locked him into a terrible deal, and then allegedly put him in a roach-infested apartment in Harlem. Curry claims Diddy humiliated him in public, but kept him close behind the scenes, using him as a PR move after Biggie's death and the Steve Stout incident. If you don't know what the Steve Stout incident is, let me fill you in. This is the point where Diddy does some irreparable damage to his image. The public really started to consider, maybe this man ain't all he's cracked up to be. In 1999, the music video for the song Hate Me Now came out, and this was a song by Nas featuring Diddy. In the music video for the song, both Nas and Diddy were crucified like Jesus. And when this video was being created up to the point where it was about to be released, Mase, Mark Curry, even Diddy's own mother and pastor told him it was blasphemous and that he shouldn't do it. But he ignored them. He ignored all of them. Until it was too late. After having a change of heart, he requested that the scene of him being crucified be removed. However, the original unedited version of the video aired on MTV anyway, and he felt the backlash immediately. The public did not like that. I personally am not a super religious person. You want to do all that, put yourself on a cross, have fun with that. However, I do think it is extremely narcissistic to compare yourself to Jesus. I'm just thinking about the thought process one would have to go through to be like, I want to be crucified. I want y'all to tie me up on a cross and just have the camera pan around as I'm bobbing my head and lip syncing my lyrics. And no hate to Nas, Nas is cool, but couldn't be me. So after this immediate backlash, what do you think Diddy's response was? Maybe it was to spin the PR like a normal celebrity, get with his PR people and spin the narrative, make things better. Hi, sisters! That is not what he did. What he did do was he stormed to the Universal Music Group building and he beat the brakes off of Nas's manager, who was Steve Stout. And according to reports, Diddy flipped Stout's desk, hit him with a phone, punched, kicked, and smashed a champagne bottle over his head. And this was all done in one of the most corporate, high-profile music offices in the world. This man is so unhinged. That's somebody who has zero EQ, has zero emotional intelligence, no control over their emotions at all. Later that same year, not long after, somehow, Clive Davis at Arista cut Diddy a $50 million advance. And the year before, Bad Boy had pulled $130 million. But by the time of this deal, sales had dropped to around 30 million. But still, Arista framed it as an investment in, quote, future expectations, banking on upcoming releases from Mase and a posthumous Biggie album, as well as Diddy himself. And then Diddy also promised Davis a gospel album, specifically with unreleased tracks from Biggie. Did you know that there was supposed to be a gospel album released under Bad Boy? Because I didn't. I think that was probably one of the biggest surprises for me throughout this whole video. He never delivered on this gospel album. Instead, the money flowed into various other projects and side hustles that Diddy conjured up, like his Sean John apparel line, jewelry, magazines. Oh my God, this just reminds me when me and my friends were kids, we used to make fun of the Sean John cologne commercial for Unforgivable because it was so corny, and he would just be like, unforgivable. So we used to say that all the time to each other.
Why does something that feels so good hurt so bad? Do you love me? Unforgivable.
The Fragrance for Men from Sean John.
And he claimed the delays were because of the gospel music acts themselves, like issues that he was having with them. And that included a young 12-year-old boy named Lil Jerome. Have you ever heard of Lil Jerome? I did not. Let me fill you in on Lil Jerome, because this was another surprise to me that I knew nothing about this. Lil Jerome wasn't one of the gospel acts he was supposed to be working with, but he was another artist Diddy put on during that time. Lil Jerome was just 12 years old, a talented kid with good vocals who was marketed as a wholesome, family-friendly R&B prodigy. Diddy was clearly trying to ride the wave that made young stars like Lil Bow Wow, Sammy, and Romeo household names. That whole early 2000s moment when the charts were full of little boys singing and rapping about love and relationships, something they were way too young to even be thinking about, it was that wave that he was trying to jump on. But his tenure with Bad Boy is really weird. The only real Bad Boy artifact that Lil Jerome left behind was this single called Too Old For Me. Too Old For Me was the name of the song. Just based on the title alone, I feel like you already know what the topic of the song is. Lyrically, it's as inappropriate as it sounds based on the title. Quote, "But when I told you how old I was, you cried and said, 'You're too old for me.' But they said, 'You're too old for me.' And I really don't agree, because you're the perfect one for me."
Barf.
And the other strange thing about this situation is that the only thing it was released on was the 2005 Bad Boys Greatest Hits Volume 1 compilation, despite the fact that it wasn't a hit or even a real single. It got a little radio time, but that was really it. It's just really weird, you know, like here's this random song, nothing else, just this one song from this artist, this little boy, and then it goes on a greatest hits compilation. It's just very weird. And it gets stranger. There was even a remix of the song featuring Diddy and Noriega. And I was like, Noriega? Why? Where the hell did he come from? And it's also really weird and disturbing and uncomfortable. There's a line where Diddy says, "When I first saw you, I wanted to become a man."
Wait a minute, something ain't right.
There was an adult who wrote the lyrics to this song with a child in mind. The research I did for this portion of the video, it was kind of a struggle because there's not a lot of information about Lil Jerome out there. I do know that now, you know, at his big age as an adult, it seems like he still does a bit of music. He actually has a Spotify, and it has nothing to do with Bad Boy. The story of Lil Jerome is just very, very bizarre. An album never materialized, and his career just disappeared into the label's chaotic priorities. And of course, again, Diddy's shifting interests. By this point, Bad Boy was less a record label and more a revolving door, flashy on the outside, very unstable at the core. I just wonder how many artists met similar fates or had similar situations with the label, like Lil Jerome, like Mark Curry, so many others, G-Dep, but the ones that Bad Boy was able to bury to the point where we don't know anything about them. Because man, I tell you, with Lil Jerome, it's like crumbs. It's like crumbs of information. So the year 1999 was a hell of a year for Bad Boy and Diddy as well. This man was involved in a lot of that impacted the label as well as its artists. I already mentioned that Diddy was always trying to fill that void that Biggie left behind after his death. He was always looking for the next Biggie replacement, not necessarily just the next biggest thing, the next big hit, the next money maker for the label, but literally like a new Biggie. He was always using what he could of Biggie's music while looking for the next Biggie. And whether that was through G-Dep, Black Rob, or Mace, but it didn't stop with them. The search continued. He thought he found that someone to fill the void in a young rapper named Jamal Barrow, aka Shyne. Shyne grew up for the most part in Brooklyn, but was born in Belize and still had family ties there. He signed a 5-album album deal with Bad Boy in 1997, and he was literally groomed to be the next Biggie. Walk the walk, talk the talk, rap like Biggie. And when I thought about it, like so many other things, it made sense. When I think about Shyne's delivery, his voice, it's very much giving Biggie. And back in the day when I was a kid, I did not notice that. I didn't pay attention to that. But the whole vibe, the swagger, the voice, it's giving Biggie. According to Mark Curry, Diddy treated Shyne terribly, but kept him close, knowing the kid's loyalty ran deep. Shyne was very, very loyal to Diddy at the beginning, and that loyalty would be tested and exploited in the worst possible way. On December 27th, 1999, Diddy, Jennifer Lopez, and Shyne rolled up to Club New York in a Bad Boy-owned Navigator. Inside, Diddy, carrying around $10,000 in cash, started tossing $100 bills in the air when the crowd didn't show him enough love, like a jackass. Bro. Oh my God. It's gotta be exhausting when you're somebody who constantly has to be the center of attention. That just can't be good on the soul, on the mind. And because, of course, he's throwing $100 bills in the air, this works. But instead of the awe he was hoping for, it caused chaos. People got trampled, drinks got spilled, tempers flared, and you think he'd learn his lesson from the club event that he threw years back where people got trampled. But no, he did not. And actually, one of the people in the crowd mocked Diddy by throwing the money back at him. I guess there was another big ego in the club that day. And in response to this, witnesses say both Diddy and Shyne pulled guns out and shots just started to ring out. And the club actually had metal detectors, but Bad Boy's entourage got waved through. And as a result, 3 people were injured in the scuffle. And as the scene exploded, Diddy, Lopez, and his bodyguard, Anthony Wolf Jones, bolted for the Navigator. And Shyne was left there with the gun still in his waistband. And of course, he was grabbed by a police officer at the door. And as they were fleeing in the Navigator, an eyewitness saw a gun just being tossed out the window. When the police caught up, they found $8,000 in $100 bills stuffed in Diddy's pockets. So that checks out. He allegedly offered Wolf and the driver $50,000 and his pinky ring to take the fall. And what's funny is the driver briefly confessed to owning the gun, but then he changed his mind. He was like, nah, f that, bro. $50K and a pinky ring to do prison time for you? And you just left your mans to take the heat? No, sir. In the end, all 3, Diddy, Wolf, and Shyne, were charged. And Jennifer Lopez, she was initially arrested, but then quickly cleared. I know a lot of people have some interesting takes about Jennifer and her involvement in that night, but that's neither here nor there. I don't do tea. I try to stick to the facts as much as I can, or you know, the witness reports. And when this went to trial, Shyne was denied a separate defense attorney, and he ended up with lawyers recommended by Diddy. How is that? That is just so up. Just knowing that and thinking about that pisses me off, because how is that okay? In the end, Shyne took the heat. He was convicted of attempted murder, assault, and weapons possession. And Diddy and Wolf got off. Shyne served nearly 10 years, and then once he finished his time, he was deported to Belize. But you know what? Shyne ended up having a pretty good ending. These days, he's made a remarkable pivot. He's now a politician in Belize, and he's far removed from the chaos of Bad Boy. So good for him. At least somebody got a happy ending, but still, this man did not get a fair trial. I'm not saying, I don't know, I wasn't there. I'm not saying he did or didn't do it, but whatever. But it's so obvious that this young man was groomed and then took the fall completely. Oh, and then of course he didn't have fair legal counsel. The 2000s was a odd time for the Bad Boy label. This is when Diddy decided to pivot into reality television. He turned artist development into a spectacle for all to see, as well as a ratings machine and just a public humiliation ritual. And so began the reality TV era of Bad Boy. The groups Diddy built only to tear them down on camera. And you know, just as a whole, the early 2000s was a strange and deeply questionable time in pop culture. Men were wearing throwback jerseys 5 sizes too big with fitteds. Women were pairing low-rise jeans with rhinestone butterfly belts and baby tees layered with spaghetti straps. And everybody smelled faintly of Curve cologne and gallons of Victoria's Secret body spray. Fat shaming, homophobia, and colorism were also in fashion, more than ever. Not saying they ever went away, but it was the thing back then. And musically speaking, the charts were a melting pot. Boy bands were still clinging to life, R&B was dominating radio, and hip-hop was crossing over into the mainstream in a way that had TRL packed with screaming teens who thought Ja Rule was the second coming. And reality TV was still figuring itself out. Survivor had just dropped people on an island to see if they would starve or form alliances. American Idol was about to make karaoke a blood sport, and networks were realizing you could glue viewers to their screens with the promise of, quote, real-life drama. In March of 2000, ABC launched a new show that claimed to give us an unprecedented behind-the-scenes look at what it really takes to form a chart-topping music group. That show was Making the Band. When Diddy got involved in later seasons, he didn't just make the band, he made the drama, the humiliation, and the ratings. I did not watch Making the Band back in the day. The closest I ever got to watching it was Dave Chappelle clowning it on The Chappelle Show.
Because I spit hot fire.
Before this video, for the research, I did watch a few episodes of it, and oh my god, it was like walking into a time capsule that I never wanted to walk into to begin with. Apparently, the show had multiple versions. I didn't know that. ABC started it in 2000 with the group O-Town and Making the Band 1. And it was so boring, y'all. Like, I'm not gonna say that what Diddy did in the other seasons was okay. It was terrible, the way he treated those artists and the contestants. But the O-Town one, Making the Band one, damn, that shit was Snoresville. So in 2002, all subsequent seasons were overseen by Diddy, who acted as the man of the house. And he had the final say on who would make it into the band. Making the Band 2 ended with the formation of the band, made up of Sarah, Chopper, Freddie P, Babs, Dylon, and Ness. Their debut album, Too Hot for TV, dropped in September of 2003, and it went gold with 600,000 copies sold, and then Diddy pulled the plug, blaming their constant drama as the reason for this. Then there was Making the Band 3 with Danity Kane, an all-girl group with Aubrey O'Day, Juanita D. Woods Woodgett, Shannon Bex, Dawn Richard, and Andrea Fimbres? Their debut album hit #1 on Billboard in 2006, selling over 234,000 in the first week. But in the 2008 finale of Making the Band 4, Diddy removed Aubrey and D. Woods, and Woods later said the firing was retaliation because Aubrey rejected his advances, calling his treatment dehumanizing and like a piece of meat. Making the Band 4 introduced all-male R&B group Day 26 and solo act Donnie Klang. Day 26 had 2 hit albums, and Klang had a top 20 record and even opened for Janet Jackson. But both of these acts were also sidelined a few years later. And I have a few takes on the show after watching it that I want to share with y'all. This has nothing to do with like the facts or the history. I just had to share this. So on the one hand, there would be scenes of the actual contestants, you know, doing their thing. And then it was switched to Diddy talking about plans for his Sean John clothing line. And then his upcoming MTV performance. I don't give a shit about that. This is Making the Band, not a day in the life of Diddy. That other shit had zero to do with the actual show. It was just an excuse for him to flex. It was like 50% of the actual purpose of the show, and then the other 50% was just him flexing. And oh my god, the soundtrack for this show, every few seconds there was like a new background song. They had a song selected for every emotion, every event. It could go from DMX to REM to Jay-Z to Mary J. Blige. Like, for example, there was this one scene I think it was in season 1 of Making the Band 2. And one of the contestants was participating in this ridiculous boot camp, not like a musical boot camp. They had these contestants doing like some fitness Navy SEALs boot camp shit, which is just stupid as shit. Like, I highly doubt that he had Faith Evans and 112 and Biggie doing laps to show how badly they wanted this. Message. She got hurt from the exercises or the boot camp, and you could tell that she was distressed, and they called the ambulance, and as the ambulance is coming to take her away to the hospital, they start playing Ludacris's Move Bitch. This woman is in tears, this woman is in pain, and the paramedics are there and they talk about some move bitch, get out the way, bitch. And they're not taking this seriously. They were treating this woman's pain like it was a joke. And then there's this other scene, this Diddy is getting his feet rubbed, calling himself daddy. That's all I had to say. That's all I had to add. I didn't even watch 50% of this shit, and that is how much I saw. The early 2000s was an interesting time, for lack of a better word, in entertainment. The shit they used to do back then would not fly today. Just like with the bad boy artists that came in through the more traditional route, the artists from Making the Band did not get lasting support. They felt like side projects. Diddy made as much money off of them as possible, and then he got bored and he would move on to the next thing. The formula just didn't change. The Bad Boy label experienced a commercial decline in the years following its initial peak. And this was marked by several factors, including the departure and struggles of key artists, financial issues, Diddy's shifting focus towards his own ventures, and his reality television endeavors, because they got to see him act like a fool on television. They got to see how he treated artists publicly. So by the early 2000s, Bad Boy was starting to noticeably flounder, and many of its more notable acts would eventually vacate the label, and those who remained saw their album sales dwindle. Despite attempts to build new artists, few achieved the same success as the label had hoped for. And while the Bad Boy label did experience somewhat of a resurgence around 2005 with new artists like Young Jock, Cassie, as well as Danity Kane from Making the Band 3, and then Day 26 and Donnie Klang, the underlying issues and departures of many established artists contributed to its overall decline from its golden age. And as I mentioned, reality TV did not help the label. It really put Diddy's controversial and abusive mentorship style on full display. And then for a time, French Montana and Machine Gun Kelly were on the label, but it appears that as of today, the only artists under the label are Janelle Monáe, Diddy himself, and his son King Combs. And so today the Bad Boy label is more like a legacy brand and a family-run business. Years later, after decades of artists begging, protesting, and calling him out on every platform known to man, Sean Diddy Combs finally agreed to hand over Bad Boy Records publishing rights to the artists and writers who built this empire. The process started in May of 2021, and some artists have already signed the paperwork. Faith Evans got hers, Mace got his, The Lox, 112, and even the estate of the Notorious B.I.G. They all finally got the rights to their songs, which means now after all these years, they can actually see royalties from their own work. Diddy says this decision was an authentic attempt to spark reform in the industry. And actually in an interview, he explained that as a businessman, there are moments when you have to pick person over profit. He also framed it as part of his mission to address how Black artists have been disproportionately disadvantaged in entertainment. And he said, "I'm about empowering Black minds, Black ideas, and Black businesses."
Let the locks go! Let the locks go!
Sir, the only Black business, Black mind, and Black ideas you empowered or wanted to empower was your own. Message! And let's not pretend that he did this out of the kindness of his heart. This came after years of public criticism about how bad the artists were being treated. In 2020, Mace blasted Diddy on social media, claiming he had ripped him off and even turned down a $2 million offer to buy back his publishing. And I remember when that was going down. And then Mark Curry called the gesture insulting insulting, pointing out that after decades, the value of those rights isn't what it used to be, and if Diddy really wanted to make things right, he'd cut the checks for what he took when the artist had no bargaining power, which I agree. So yes, the publishing is back in the hands of the people who created the music, but it's hard to ignore that this is happening after every possible drop, every morsel of value has already been squeezed out. It's like getting your car back after the repo man has been driving it for 20 years. Sure, you got it back, but now it's got 300,000 plus miles on it and it smells like somebody's funky cologne in a pack of Salem's. And that, my friends, is the history of the Bad Boy music label. What a long journey it's been. You know, I grew up during the peak of the label, and as I've stated, I have many fond memories with the backdrop being the Bad Boy sound. A lot of amazing Bad Boy artists. And it's just so sad knowing that these artists were going through it behind the scenes while we were, the public, we were enjoying their music. It goes without saying that the music industry is a breeding ground for nefarious people to take advantage of artists. And Bad Boy serves as a case study on how it can manifest. I just want to give a quick shout out to all of the new people who subscribe to Old Dirty History that came from Fat Charlie's video on living single versus friends. Welcome to my little corner of the internet. I'm so happy to have you. Anyway, if you stuck until the end of the series, thank you so much for watching. And if you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And that's all I got. I will catch y'all in the next one. Peace out.